The opinions expressed on the following audio program are solely those of the host and the guests. Burner Podcast is an independently produced, not-for-profit show and is not associated with the Burning Man organization or its subsidiaries. The views expressed are not representative of the entire Burning Man community and are presented here for entertainment purposes only. In short, calm the fuck down. It's just a podcast.
All right, it's episode number 77, and it is 179 days till the man burns as of this recording. What a 2018 it has been already. We kicked off the year with Camp Walter in Arizona. As you guys know, I got to meet and interview one of my heroes, Lorenzo, the host of Psychedelic Salon podcast. Every weekend has been another little crazy adventure in some crazy corner of the Southwest. And in a couple of weeks, I'm heading out to Bombay Beach, where producer Rebel is currently at, building a bunch of giant art. Bombay Beach is another crazy little town in the Salton Sea area. The Salton Sea is, if you're not familiar with it, it's hard to describe. It's California's largest lake, but due to some irrigation disaster a few years ago, it went from being like the hottest vacation spot into this kind of like post-apocalyptic looking place with a lot of like abandoned structures and stuff. And there's still towns around it where people live, but I've never been quite able to grasp the area, and I've never been. If you Google it there's a ton written about it. There's a ton of photography. I've mostly been aware of the Salton Sea and Bombay Beach because I know that the area has historically just captured the imaginations of photographers with all the textures and colors, and it's a playground if you're a visual artist, that's for sure. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the area and telling you all about what producer Rebel has been working on out there, because we do plan to record a couple of interviews while we're out there next weekend, and they are big ones too. I mean, like, I know like size doesn't matter or anything, but these are going to be huge. They're going to be pretty big. But that's what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. So today's show is a really big one. I know I keep saying size doesn't matter, but this show is going to be huge. The interview you're about to hear was recorded on a cold, rainy day in London, which might be redundant. I guess they're all cold, rainy days in London. It's just a couple of blocks away from the Bethnal Green Starbucks location, where I went to town on some chocolate cookie concoction I've thankfully yet to encounter stateside. And the man whom you are about to get to know intimately is Mr. Arthur Mamou-Mani, the designer of Burning Man 2018's temple, entitled Galaxia. Oh man. Side note, by the way, I am a hardcore sugar addict, and if sugar is your drug of choice, London is like a goddamn crack house. Also, London also pops up on a lot of lists of the world's most creative cities, and so my little trip to connect with Arthur contained many examples of why that is. I met up with him at his office on Hackney Road, which is Hackney Road, by the way. What a perfect name for a city in London. Tucked away behind a cool little coffee shop in a black brick building where he came out to meet me. We stepped through a gate into a silo of refurbished shipping containers housing offices and meeting rooms and another little coffee shop. There's a little coffee shop behind the little coffee shop. They're doing a lot of cool stuff over at Mamou-Mani Limited, which you will be learning all about very, very shortly. We found some silence in the upstairs loft above his office where I kicked off my shoes. Apparently that's also where he used to live. And we sat on the floor and just started recording. A couple of links if you want to browse while listening. There's, of course, Mamou-Mani.com. It is spelled MAMOU-MANI.com. It's pretty easy to Google, by the way, if you didn't catch that. Also, we want to learn.net is going to come up during the conversation. This interview does go a little bit longer than our usual interviews do. You may have noticed that from the runtime. on this episode. And the reason for that is, as you'll hear, it's like the perfect packaging of everything that makes a Burning Man conversation just perfect. Arthur is just such a lovely, lovely human being. I know I said that on the last episode's intro, but he is just such a lovely person. We start with a great deal of discussion about architecture theory and history as we follow his journey of leaving his hometown of Paris, to find God through art. I'm not being melodramatic. Me never. About 45 minutes into the conversation, we do get more into the Burning Man stuff, and I stare at him incredulously as he tells the story of his entire class of students, all of whom who'd never even been to the burn, submitting projects for Burning Man, including him, by the way. He himself hadn't even been to the burn, and he's having a whole class of architecture students submit projects. Let me tell you, my observation has been that architects are an audacious bunch. I feel like audacity might be something that just like comes with the territory of being an architect. And it's somewhere after the hour mark when we get into like the temple stuff specifically. And yes, David Best does make a cameo in today's story. Obviously, he will be referenced. There are so many moments in today's show that just had me floored. And one of the biggies was the part where we get into how important fundraising still is for the temple. It's something we know. We all know it. You see the requests to raise money, but at the same time, we kind of forget, because the temple is just such an institution, and Burning Man org does such a great job choosing and supporting strong leaders in their institutions that it's almost like we forget that it is a city that we built. And we will chat more about that subject for sure, but that is an important thing to keep in the back of your head. Please do visit the temple's fundraising portal. As with any project on Playa, Galaxia does still need your support in order to become a reality. The link is over at mamou-mani.com. Again, that's MAMOU-MANI.com. And after the conversation, do stick around for a thumping set by British techno purveyors Soul of Noise. It's a fucking great set. I've been bumping to that all day while kind of setting up this episode. We'll be playing an hour of their sunrise set at the Playground stage. This one is from Burning Man 2015. We connected with Soul of Noise, and this is the one that they really liked. They're like, this is the one. I think I was there for that. I'm honestly not sure if I was there for this particular set, but Soul of Noise is also based out of London, and so Alkaline Podcasts, Navjit Sarna, whom I traveled to the United Kingdom with, got to spend some time with Soul at their studio while we were out there. So stay tuned for that in order to further solidify that today's episode is like a burner love letter to the city of London. So, by the way, my favorite quote from today's episode is from Jerry James, the first builder of the man. He said, "Arthur, it was just meant to be a barbecue on the beach." Okay, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's blast off. Today's episode is entitled Across the Galaxia. I go by Mr. Arash, even though nobody calls me Mr. Welcome to Burn the Podcast.
On the first part of the journey, I was looking at all the life. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was the fly with the balls and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no name.
set very high, and the show ends up being not terribly amazing. And then you have other ones that you are just trying to meet that deadline, and it ends up being just a fabulous, amazing show that you did not expect.
It's true. Well, just like design, sometimes it's good to have this, like to be somehow forced to do on a regular basis and trying to have this constraint of producing content. It kind of pushes creativity to some extent, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think it's a basic principle of design as a whole, isn't it? Like a consistency and variation.
Yeah.
Because if you put an anchor down somewhere and you start building around that, so you have this one consistent thing, and then you vary around it in order to make interesting design.
Interesting.
And I would say that seems to me, which by the way you're the expert at, so feel free to chime in.
No, but, consistency and variation. This is exactly what we call it parametric design. Mm-hmm. That's what the temple is based on. That's what our style is based on here in the office. So it's exactly that. It's trying to find a rule and something that can vary a system, so that you have, let's say, it's almost like music. You have a sort of consistency, a rigor, a kind of relationship between notes and so on, but then you have variations within that.
Exactly.
So in the temple, it goes from those big triangles to those small triangles, and they're all kind of going to the sky. So it sort of poetically drives your eye and your kind of movement towards the sky. For me, a cathedral, a spiritual place has to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's what we're describing here right now is basically a consistent way to describe reality and life.
That is very true.
You know, we build certain routines, we build certain relationships, and then from those relationships and from those routines, we stretch out and try new things.
Yeah.
You know, I would try to wake up around the same time-ish every day, and then every day try to do something new and exciting that spreads a little further out of the...
That's very, very true. And interestingly enough, what this approach called parametric design is actually very close to how nature creates geometries or create forms, in that because it's a sort of relationship, so, you know, slight variations on a sort of common DNA, you find out that a lot of these geometries that come out from that process are extremely natural looking.
Right.
And it's really interesting because we're making stuff out of wood, out of, you know, we use bioplastic and so on, but at the end of the day, they really look like they came out of some spider or some... kind of natural animal that is just very consistent in the way he does things, but with an understanding of the material he play with. Right. So I find this almost like external to the designer. It's almost like you set rules and then there is that spider that does it. And therefore it's almost like more of a choreographer or a gardener than an architect that sort of draws things, you know. I find this very satisfying because then it's very external from the designer's head. It's more of a, playing with things that are happening externally from you. So it has a life of its own, and therefore everyone else feels part of it.
You're planting the seeds and you're writing the code so that the thing starts to write its own code.
Correct. Exactly. Exactly. And that's really, I find this, some people find it scary. I find it very satisfying because you'd be a very lonely creator if you couldn't just kind of let the thing have a life of its own. Like if you were to always have to think of everything in a very top-down fashion, right. If you had to draw everything and know everything, then you never learn anything. And so being able or letting yourself not know and learning from what you're doing. Like we had a tutorial yesterday from a carpenter who's working on this giant shed here. And we said, why don't you sit down with us and tell us what you think? I mean, you know, you're so much more experienced than us. We're in front of computers, we have lines, but you know how to do a timber joint, you know how to... And he sat down and it was just the best conversation. He's like, timber at 4 meters starts to bend. Therefore, you guys need to consider smaller sections, maybe square sections and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was just like, and it's so amazing. And I can talk for ages about it.
Yeah. Well, good thing we've got an hour and a half to fill. So
Yeah, I mean that's how we started this whole journey. I have a colleague of mine called Toby Burgess, with who we went. We suggested about 4 or 5 years ago to University of Westminster to start teaching the kind of values of Burning Man to our students as an architecture studio, which was a bit unusual. We went to our interview. We're like, yeah, we'd like to maybe bring them to the desert and build some structures and in people's mind, Burning Man is not necessarily associated with those guiding principles and so on. So I was so surprised they said okay. and then we decided to have a blog so we could share all our ideas, and we called it We Want to Learn, because I was 28 at the time. And I just thought, you know what, I don't have much to teach, actually. All I can do is learn with them. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to learn with them through that process of bringing them to the desert and making them do their designs, and trying to understand how the whole thing can bring, let's say, a poetic approach and a more playful and interactive notion to architecture.
And that's, you said, is we want to learn, that's we-want-to-learn.com, correct?
.net.
.net, okay, yes. I was starting to peek at that earlier. So what year was that when you started that? Because I'm assuming that was after you attended your first burn.
No, I never ever went to a festival. I know Burning Man is beyond the festival, but I've never done any of the kind of things associated with Burning Man. And I was more on the geeky side, to be honest. I was teaching every Saturday software workshops, and this was. You said, what year was this? That was
2010,
2011, maybe something like this.
So how did the idea of taking these Burning Man principles and bringing it to the school begin?
That's a great question. I actually didn't know anything about Burning Man. I remember seeing pictures online and being amazed, but that's about it. And Toby, my colleague, had a girlfriend at the time, and she just came back from it.
Right.
We, as sort of architects, and we knew about people like Buckminster Fuller, who invented the geodesic dome that is very present in, and also he went way beyond that. He talked about spaceship Earth and how the first environmental concepts and so on. And we were very excited at the idea of looking at what Buckminster Fuller's legacy was, and it just happens that we talked about California and how our parents were hippies and what happens to all that. And, my dad wrote books about the sort of the heritage of the kind of age of hippies in the Wall Street. He wrote a book called How to Reconciliate Wall Street and Woodstock, or something like that. Okay. Which, they brought me to these seminars where you had people like Ben and Jerry's and how did all these hippies become millionaires and then stayed with their own, their kind of ideals. And for me, that was so interesting. And Burning Man, when he started talking about it, at first I'm like, maybe that's what happened to the whole thing. Maybe my dad would be a burner if he could,
Well, let's do that then. I'm sorry. I want to go back to the beginning of your story then. So you're, where were you born?
Oh.
Now we're going to the States.
We're going way back.
Yeah.
I was born in Paris, France.
Okay. Tell me your first. I'm just kidding. Okay. So you're born in Paris.
Yeah.
But your parents, you're describing your dad was an author, obviously.
My dad is an interesting character. He come from Tunisia, hence my strange name. And he came and arrived in the suburbs of Paris, and then studied computer science. And then he slowly kind of made his way towards, this side of things, because my mom, on her side, was involved with the creation of the kind of ecologist movements in France. So they decided together to create a movement, ecologist movement in France. And then they kind of started writing books together. They called it The Life in Green, How to Reconciliate Woodstock and Wall Street. Then he wrote another book called Beyond Profit, where he was trying, because he used to be I think you can say this in the US now, he used to be a communist.
Yeah.
not sure you can say this.
Yeah. No, there's a new generation of people that have accepted that that's not the worst word.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool.
But then there's also a whole other generation that I think is the worst word.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, it was fairly common in France in the 60s, and they had this whole movement in 69, and it's called May 69, and it's where, you know, the students went in the street and they were unhappy. It wasn't very clear what they were unhappy about, but they were just kind of wanting to change the sort of old generation way of things, and there were really interesting creative movement around that. You know, you had people like I don't know, like. There was this thing called the People's Atelier, where they were doing these posters, where this whole movement of surrealism and kind of situationism, all these things that were happening at the time, and it was a very interesting blend of liberation and sort of art that happened at the time. And I think my parents, that's exactly when my parents met.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I think that influenced their whole kind of journey, and therefore mine that came from it.
Absolutely.
And
you came out of the factory already downloaded with the proper software.
Pretty much, yeah. And so when I was born, I was kind of facing all these things where my parents were telling me about these new sort of values of being open to the world and kind of open to the idea of the environment and how to respect the environment and so all this kind of brewed in my mind. And my dad was an entrepreneur, so sure, he started as communist, but then he became a very successful entrepreneur and you know, sold his software company and so on. And then after that, I was
going to say that right there is very burner right there.
I know.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting, right? Because if you're a communist and then you're a successful entrepreneur, you must be kind of thinking a lot. Yeah. I'm pretty sure he thinks a lot about all these things. But
you were more like you said, into like coding and more like the geeky side of things.
Yeah. Sorry. So I
sketching them out.
So I'm more. So there's a whole generation, let's say, of new architects that somehow, because we use that software called Rhino, and this is very sort of open in terms of its code, and you have a whole generation that started coding and started creating designs, what we call generative design or parametric design, which is how you sort of use code instead of drawing the piece, you kind of code it. And that's a very new thing in architecture. And so
meaning that instead of drawing it out from scratch with your own head, you're laying out certain pieces and allowing the links to kind of connect to each other through the software.
Correct. You got it exactly. Okay. That's it. So, for example, on Galaxia, you kind of establish the mathematical relationship between the elements. So you're not necessarily kind of drawing it manually, one member at a time. It's just you're looking at the bigger picture and the symmetries and the graph, the mathematical graphs behind it, and you play with that as opposed to each individual members. So
it allows you to expand the systems much further and
to be quick as well, and to be very quick to iterate, and therefore creating some kind of empirical loop, with also the engineers who's checking the structural things, and also with like the environmental simulations, and so you're creating this sort of loop between parameters and external parameters, internal parameters, and so it's really interesting, because then if you apply things like AI, evolutionary solvers, stuff like this, you can kind of iterate really, really quick until it kind of fits the environment that it needs to be in. And so in that sense, I find this really, really fascinating, because you're letting the computer work with you. You're collaborating with it, the computer and the machines that produce the piece, and therefore you live in this really interesting sort of relationship with your tools, where they're more like it's more like a craft. How the craftsman learn from his tools. It's the same here, but it's just a digital craft.
Right. Yeah, it's instead of having to run into the studio and record every instrument separately, you're able to conduct an orchestra.
Yes, an orchestra of instruments that self-do stuff.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So and you were saying that you were part of this generation that came into this doing this kind of work, utilizing this kind of software. So it deeply affected the kinds of designs, I'm assuming, that came out of it.
100%. And it really drove a new kind of aesthetic. There's one guy who calls it parametricism. It's probably the most complex word you'll say.
Parametric, okay.
because the tool.
I just came from Germany. There's much weirder words.
He comes from Germany.
Okay.
Called Patrick Schumacher. He works with someone called Zaha Hadid. Zaha Hadid is probably one of the greatest architects of this century. So and she completely freed architecture. Similarly to say Frank Gehry or people like this who just they just arrived and made things that were never done before. They don't necessarily they didn't know the tools or the things. They just had this ambition to say, get rid of the 90 degrees or, and so she also learned mathematics and so on. So she completely broke the barriers, and I was working there, and so is many people that are part of this new generation of coder architect, let's call it this way. And him, Patrick Schumacher, just wrote whole books about how it's a new style and we're part of it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So you came up in this generation in Paris. You were continuing to live there?
No. I moved from Paris when I was about 20 to study here in a school called the Architectural Association, which is where I did studied and where I've learned about all these tools and so on. I love France, but I think there's no way I would have learned these things so early in France.
Why is that?
We're more, I think, there might be the a kind of deep reason that I think is that Paris is just too beautiful. And I think it's just one of those cities that is just, to me, is a bit stuck in its beauty, because it's incredible. It's just made of these stones, these really beautiful stones. It would feel so bad to demolish a building and then rebuild one. And it's so ornate and it's so beautiful. And so it's really hard to be creative when everything is so beautiful.
Yeah.
London is rough. London is so rough. It's made from these little bricks, so it's easier to demolish a brick wall than a stone wall. Yeah. And I think the fact that it was bombed, the fact that they had to renew it from the heart, it just allowed a sort of patchwork architectural mentality, and also a drive to the future. And also a lot of people are entrepreneurs in England, and in France it's not like this. It's more big firms that control most of it. In London it's full of small entrepreneurs that are keen to do stuff, and so the whole spirit meant that it created these kind of schools of architecture that are very, very open-minded. And the Architectural Association is one. There are others, but
there's also the Parisian pride in the city of Paris, and I imagine that would even affect. I just came from Paris right before.
Oh, really?
This. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, it is. I completely understand as an artist how. I live in San Diego in Southern California, and I look at a lot of the artists around me in San Diego, and I think they've come up with some truly spectacular things that musicians and artists in LA I don't think have been able to, because LA has such a culture already built into it, whereas in San Diego they're kind of outsiders.
Yeah, no, you're right. Parisian pride is something that's very hard for external people. There is a sense of politeness and rigor and kind of get shit done.
How dare you get
in England? No, in Paris it's more it is a pride. It's this sort of feeling that it's the center of something, and it I would say it was, and we should get back to that. But I think if you think too much about your position in the world and who you are a bit too much, you get a bit stuck in a sort of negative loop. One shouldn't think about their position in the world. One should just do stuff, and I think in Paris it is a bit stuck in that sense. And
the consciousness is very strong, and it's hard to get out, from coincidence, I guess is a funny analogy, to get out from your parents' shadow.
Well, in all sense, and
literally and figuratively.
Yeah, exactly. So I had to go.
So here you are in London.
And here I am, and I studied here. And my first assignment when I arrived here was amazing. My teachers were take a game and diagram that game, you know, and that was the first assignment they gave me. Well, knowing that I came from a place where the assignment was like, this is your site, we want a house, build a house, without telling me how I can be creative, how do you even think outside of the box. It's just, that was the assignment there. And here it's take a game, draw the game, and you know, a game is dynamic. So how do you draw something that's dynamic? It's very hard. So you have to think completely, like you have to break everything you knew. And it's like, and I chose baseball. I don't know why. I think I just liked the fact that it was so geometrical and movements and so on. And I started drawing it with its own symbols. I had to invent symbols. I had to think of the players in relation to each other. And suddenly it became a dance that you had to explain with rigor. And so, you know, so it started that thinking about this whole parametric thing, you know. And so it was just the start of something that brewed in my mind. So really that school had a huge influence. And then I realized they had these machines and 3D printing and laser cutting. And at the time it was, wow. It was just like, wow, you can do computer stuff with real materials, with real objects. So it's not just some abstract thing. It's a real material thing. That was, for me, that was mind-blowing.
Yeah. At some point you meet Toby.
Yeah, Toby, we met in the cafe and he started teaching me something on the computer and he was so friendly and I can see now why he kind of became a teacher because he was just so friendly. And
was he a burner at the time or?
No, not at all. I mean, he's more on the festival side, on the kind of open sort of wild. I mean, he grew up in a ranch, you know, doing rodeo with his parents. Like it was the opposite. He was kind of building his own boat and like kind of more on the hands-on side of thing, you know. And so coming from the more geeky side, it was a very complementary relationship.
So at that time, you weren't as much hands-on because that's
no.
Okay,
at all.
That's a part of your what you do now.
Yeah. No, you're right.
But at that time, it was more like a behind the computer kind of.
Yeah, completely behind the computer. You know, in Paris, it's way harder, I suppose, as well because we don't have access to workshops like we do here. I mean, like here we're kind of neighbors to the hack space, to the they call this the maker mile because it's where all the fabricators were, and now you have all these maker spaces that are. But at the time, this whole makers thing didn't really exist, at least in Paris. But yeah, so when I realized this computer kind of relationship with the physical stuff, it pushed me to understand the physical aspects. So, you know, carpentry, welding, and so on. Like and when we came the first time to Burning Man, we had no choice but to make things. That's the beauty of building there is you're in the desert. Yeah. You're like, okay, we're missing that kind of attachment. What should we do? Like, and then all these community also of artists that are around, you know, they just tell you, they just come by. And at first it's like, oh, stop bothering me. I have to finish my job. But then you realize, actually, let's embrace that dialogue. Let's talk to people. Let's talk to everyone. Right. Everyone has something to teach, you know, and I really enjoy that. And I think once I decided to embrace that, I will talk to people. I will understand what they have to say, what they have to teach. It really made me love Burning Man. Right. I think I just loved it as soon as I became open to the idea of listening to people. Yeah.
Absolutely. You have to get broken in. Well, I want to go back to where we want to learn.net got started. So Toby's girlfriend had just come from Burning Man.
Correct.
He hadn't gone yet?
He had not gone, no. Okay. He's been to things like Wilderness, I think, like more local versions of Burning Man.
Okay. And then, so you guys come up with the idea of taking these Burning Man principles and...
Yeah, we had an interview with the Dean of Westminster, and we said we're going to first study Buckminster Fuller and Frei Otto, which is another revolutionary architect, and we're going to study Burning Man on the second term, and then third term we're going to take those principles and grow into things like new headquarters for businesses and so on.
Wow. And what year was this?
That was 2000, I think 2011, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so, because I want to say, it was Shipwreck 2012?
Oh, good research.
Yeah. I mean, barely.
So I think so. And so, but just, so the first year we did it, we didn't know there was a grant, an honorarium grant. We just thought, let's learn it and let's kind of use this as our site for our projects.
And 2012 was your first year.
So
because 2011 is when you brought up we want to learn, and then you actually end up going to the Burn.
It wasn't that quick, so it's quite an interesting story. The first year we did projects, we realized we could submit for an honorarium, so we got the job. We started researching things, and then our students, it was a really great year, the first year, but completely naive. We started using the sand. Some students did some kind of sand mound that he would 3D print with some PVA glue, and another did a giant solar balloon that would take people to the sky, and we just were wild. Yeah. Those ideas were wild, and then we submitted it, and at the time I remember Burning Man, they must have thought like, why are those 20 submissions? What the hell?
From these people, by the way, who've never been.
You've never been. And so anyway, and I don't think many architects submitted things. I think it was mostly artists.
Yeah.
And so they received 20 submission, suddenly with renders. So because we're architect, we know how to visualize, our architectural projects, and they're very building-like, although those were crazy. Someone did a sort of jacuzzi with like salt crystals that would grow on the structure from the...
Wow. How many students in these classes?
We're 20 students every year.
20 students every year. And I'm sorry, and Toby's girlfriend, by the way, was she an artist?
Yes. Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know, I'm just curious. Because I'm trying to understand, so a couple of years ago...
I'm not sure if he wants me to say all these things, but yeah. She was an artist, and she is an artist, and they're not together anymore. Uh-huh. But yeah, she just came back from there, and you're right, she's an artist.
She said, well, let's do this thing. What sort of artist was she? Do you know? What her medium was?
I think she's a painter, yeah.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is, a couple of years ago, our team... Romero is probably listening to this episode right now. Romero is our chief playa scientist for the Burner podcast team. Yeah. We took a project out to the playa, and Romero is an architect, and so he really came at it with like a lot of like 3D printing design. There was a lot of and he hadn't really spent a lot of time on playa yet at that time. Uh-huh. And so the designs and stuff that he'd come up with, I kept looking at him and saying, listen, I don't know shit about architecture and building. I'm a media guy. Okay. But I feel like it needs to be sturdier, and I don't know how else to describe it. So you guys who've never actually been out to the playa.
Feedback. Yeah, it needs to be sturdier.
It needs to be rough and tough. It's a rough environment, and you guys submitted 20 designs without ever having been out there.
Yeah, and actually they all got scrapped. When we first submitted it, I think at the time Betty June Scarborough was in charge of the honorarium. And she probably saw them and thought, oh, these are visually really stunning, but there's no way they're going to be okay for playa. And so she contacted us and said, can I come see you guys? Because obviously there's lots of potential here, but none of your submissions are. She gave tickets to everyone. I think to all the ones that really stood out in terms of their ambition, she gave free tickets to them. Oh, wow. And a few of them went. Yeah. But we didn't go because I don't know why, actually. We should have gone as research. But those few wild students went there the first year. And then she came to see us that summer. Yeah. And we had a sort of really interesting talk. She showed us all the projects that made it through. And then what sort of... Exactly. Make it sturdier, make it interactive, make it night friendly, because a lot of it happens at the night, and we didn't even submit night renders. We didn't know all these things. Then she showed us the sort of winning designs and the materials that are being used, the fact that we have to resist 70 miles an hour winds, the ground anchors. I don't know, all those practical stuff that we had no idea about.
I say this with all of the love in the world. Yeah. The audacity of you to submit 20 designs and never having been. Yeah. That is amazing. Okay.
Well, to be honest, most student projects never make it to reality. Right. Like, that's the story of architecture students. You make projects to get your diploma. Right. You never make projects to go and build it. But that's something we wanted to challenge, because there is a real divide between reality and architecture studies, especially at this age of computer kind of coding and parametric stuff. It was all very unreal. And so bringing them and making it happen in reality and being this sort of having an entrepreneurial journey towards making a project happen, I thought, and we thought it was a really great way to teach architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, because it was the same thing in like, you know, graphic design schools and everything. Is a lot of the stuff that we would learn in graphic design classes never fly in like the private sector. Like, you know, once you get out there, you get gut checked all of a sudden by how little creativity you get to actually do. Yeah. Most graphic designers. I mean, it's interesting. I imagine it's a lot of, you know what it is? It's kind of like the difference between doing a dry run versus a beta test. You know, like if you do a dry run, you're just like assuming it's not going to actually go anywhere. Whereas a beta test, you're kind of like, I'm kind of hoping it does.
There's no better teacher than the life and the action and the project and the fact that it's going to happen. It's what you said about deadline at first. You got to deliver. Yeah. Shit. And when you got to deliver in a kind of abstract world is one thing, but you got to deliver on Playa, you know, for an event that you know the date is happening, and it's much more scary, and therefore you probably are more real in your creativity, and therefore you learn more and faster.
Absolutely. And so a side note, by the way, that's so beautiful that Beijing came out and saw you guys and actually like continued to support you. That right there, if anything, that further affirmed that you guys were on the right path by choosing the Burning Man approach.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I, you know, the fact that she came and the fact that we had this, we went for a cafe, like a coffee and stuff, like, wow, like we were just blown away. And that really, you're right, actually, it made us consider this as a very serious journey. And it's so serious, it led to all the way now to the temple, and also, I'm skipping some steps, so I'll step back.
We'll get to it.
But it was really just a very encouraging moment. And the next year, we did it with all her feedback in mind. And so we set the brief and we really guided them towards delivering something that's achievable, you know, using timber, using materials that we knew we could sort of use for these pieces. And because we use all these lasers and so on, what's nice is we can just send files and someone can cut them there, and then it comes as a puzzle to Playa, and all these ideas I think made it more real. And so that's the year that Shipwreck and Fractal Cult got the first honorarium for our group We Want to Learn, which was really amazing. And that summer was quite something.
Yeah, I had noted, the reason I had like Shipwreck noted in my notes was that it really stood out to me as like the most different out of all the stuff that is kind of in your portfolio.
It's very narrative based. So that was Georgia Rose Collard, one of our students who submitted this, and when she submitted it, what she wrote was so powerful. I was like, she basically, she talked about the project not as like I'm doing all the time, you know, parametric, blah, blah, blah. She was just like, when you're alone and you see that light and it feels like someone is here, and you see that shipwreck and that lonely person who lives there after the boat kind of wrecks itself. And she wrote that, and it was just so emotional and beautifully written. And but then you see the piece, and it's actually just timber pieces put together with, you know, very elegantly with screws and so on. So it just worked, you know. And then we, you know, and then the Fractal Cult was like this kind of really interesting geometries and made of scaffolding and plywood. At the time when the students submitted, and when we got and then we went to build it, the whole journey from winning the first 2 honorarium and then getting them real, then that's where the learning process happened. That's where we wanted to learn, and we learned, because that was for us, we were all virgin. We were.
So you didn't go in 2012. Is that what you were saying earlier?
So the very first year, before Betty June came to see us, we didn't win anything. Okay. And we didn't go.
Okay.
Then we won Shipwreck and Fractal Cult with our students' designs. And then we went there with them.
Okay, so that was your virgin year.
That was our virgin year. Everyone in the crew was a virgin.
Wow.
Not a single person. So we all traveled there with our entire class to build 2 projects, having never been to Playa, nothing. Just we went there, and Betty June welcomed us there and say, "You made it," and we started the process. So they paired us up with a guy, really, really nice guy, who took us in San Francisco, explained everything to us. Because not only did we have to learn how to build there, but also how to just be at Burning Man. So I didn't know about the water. I didn't know about most of the stuff that everyone knows.
So you guys arrived in San Francisco and you kind of were doing all of this from scratch at that time, preparing for the playa?
From scratch.
Yeah.
Like from
Had you ever been camping before?
Not really.
Okay.
No camping. Yeah.
This is how long before gates open? How long earlier? How much time did you have in San Francisco before you went out there?
I was lucky because when you're teaching, at the time, I obviously I didn't have many projects, and so I could spend the time to really prepare. And I sat down with Georgia and we kind of reworked the structure a lot because at the time it was a 3D model. Again, no sort of physical reality just yet. So we can really just put a lot of energy on guiding the students and really making it happen. We were very lucky because at the time we met these engineers with who we always worked until now on the temple. I met them through a project I was working on, which is actually interesting because it's probably a very similar design to Galaxia. We'll come back to that, but they, through that project, I said, why don't you help us on the Burning Man project? They're called Format Engineering, but at the time they were another firm and so on. And we sat down together and really developed like how to build these things. And so we had to work hand in hand with engineers. Again, not a common thing for architecture students to sit down with engineers and figure out wind loads, all these loads. And so that design really developed itself towards a real thing through making big models and proving that the big models could stand up and so on and so forth. So that was a really great. We made spaghetti models for the big scaffolding structures, and that was really interesting. And the logistics that came behind it, and all these spreadsheets we had to do for the orders of material and so on. We learned so much that year.
I want to ask you a question that may potentially be so ignorant that might make any of our architect listeners want to pull their hair out. But are there huge, epically respected and beloved architects whose work stands the test of time, whose approach is strictly conceptual and they've never worked with engineers and don't actually get out there with the making?
Wow, that is a deep question. It's a very good question. So basically what we call a paper architect,
right.
Someone who kind of spent most of the time in the theoretical world and hasn't necessarily manifested real structure.
So it's the total opposite of what you guys are doing.
Yes, there's so many. Yeah. In fact, I would say, I don't want to say most architects are like this, but most architects who are trying to do things that are very unusual spend a long time in that paper space, the space in which you're just developing theoretical geometries. There are famous examples like Daniel Lipskin, who did the Jewish Museum in Berlin, for example, spent most of his career in the paper space world. In fact, Zaha Hadid is the same. The first buildings these guys did, was when they were in their 40s probably.
And they never physically got involved in the building part of it and working with the engineers. They were...
Well, I'm sure they did. I mean, but
that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, most architects you can't avoid working with engineers because
this is what I feel like. It's almost like, I'm sorry, making a hair reference, but it's like they say, trusting a bald barber or a skinny chef.
I think I see what you mean. The architects, I think that it's even deeper than that. There was a separation between engineering and architecture that happened, around probably the Renaissance age. It's hard to say, but the architect emerging as someone who wouldn't calculate his own structures is something that was, to me, really, it's a bit bad because it meant that you had on one side the designer, the conceptual designer, and on the other side you have the guy who actually makes sure it doesn't fall down. Mm-hmm. That separation is a bit strange, isn't it? Yeah. Because you just end up with someone who doesn't necessarily know what stands and what doesn't stand.
Right.
And then you have the guy who knows.
I could see the argument on both sides because, I imagine like in filmmaking, for example, as a filmmaker, I think it's important that I've gone through the editing process so that I have that in mind as I shoot. Especially because I have a music video background, so editing is huge.
Yeah.
Whereas I've had like my cousin in Iran is a filmmaker and actress as well, and she strongly believes that you should direct and focus on working with the actors and the camera angles and all this stuff, and then hand it over to the editor and walk away. It is not, because now it's their art.
Right.
You've handed it off.
Oh,
and
that's nice.
I passionately feel this way. She passionately feels that way. And I don't think either of us is wrong or right. So it's interesting that, it's basically a different approach to architecture that you're describing is
a much more collaborative approach. Like, I think unless, I mean, it's really, it's those are very deep questions, but I really think that when you break the walls between the different parties involved in the process of creation, you get something that's much more holistic. In other words, like when at the time of cathedrals, to me, which is the most beautiful age in architecture, where you had what's called the master builder. Yeah. Master builders were people that were on site. They were the designers, they were the architects, they were the engineers, they were the contractors. They were there to just create that piece that had to be as uplifting as possible. And they knew stone, and they tested stone, and they did arches, and if it fell down, they did it again, and so on. And they were very empirical in their approach. They weren't just kind of drawing something and then passing it on to an engineer who would check, who would then pass it on to a contractor who would build. They were just kind of live doing shit. And then as they were live doing things, they learned and created things that were highly sophisticated. And not only that, but they created a sort of book of empirical knowledge that would then be passed on to the next one, and so on and so forth. And so it was almost like this open source, holistic, empirical loop of creating beautiful stuff. Yeah. And that to me is really what I think this whole new approach of parametric design could bring back. Yeah. And I work with this really amazing guy in the team called Aaron Potterfield. And the way I met him is because there is this website called The Instructables. Yeah. And we were working on this ceiling for this really prestigious engineering office called Burr Happold. And I wanted to use a sort of open source technique because I just had a laser cutter, and I thought, what's the best way to push it? And I saw Aaron's post where he had this kind of really interesting lattice hinge technique where you would bend wood based on a cut. And I thought, I'm going to take that, and I'm going to make it all parametric and play with it and play it to the very edge to make a really interesting model based on that technique. So the technique is not mine. The software is not mine. What is mine to some extent? Nothing much, because actually I just kind of took something and then reworked it together with other amazing designers and collaborators. And then we just tested it, 50, 100 models with the laser cutter, and push the parameters till it breaks. And then we kind of came up with that wooden wave project that became a ceiling, but not just decorative. It was an acoustic barrier. It was a thermal diffuser, because it had these phase changing materials. It had all these LED diffusers. It had all these kind of performance, but based on a flat sheet of plywood, which is really cheap. But the intelligence was not the material. It was the way you send parameters and cuts to that materials. And I contacted Aaron, and I said, hey, look what we did. And then he said, oh, great. Why don't you pass me the file, and so on. And then he put it back open source. And then so other people can take this again, not the file of the finished design, but the technique, And so people could kind of take the technique and develop it even more, and so on, and go back to that empirical loop again. And I think that's really, really nice. Aaron is the US lead of Galaxia now. He came to Burning Man with us a couple times, and it's just a fantastic philosophy. I really, really believe in that age where we break those barriers, we work together, we develop techniques that we share, that we teach, and we create the new kind of cathedrals. Absolutely.
It's a more loving and open way to navigate careers and art and the world in general. But I think I would even argue what you're describing is it's more confident. Because it's not this fear of like, I need to hold on to this because nobody else must be able to copy me. It's this confidence of like, yeah, I'll do a new thing next. Like, this isn't everything I've ever done.
Yeah. You're completely right. And it's funny. I think the idea of burning a structure and letting go of it, and so many people, architects, approach me and say, "Oh, all this effort and you just burn it," and I'm like, "Well, actually, even better.
Yeah, I'll make another one.
Yeah, we just move on and we just." And to be honest, the beauty is not in the finished object. It's in the system. It's in the innovation, in the stuff that we, the whole journey. And if someone wants it permanent, so be it. Hire us and we'll do a permanent one with great pleasure. It's like the Eiffel Tower. It was supposed to be temporary. People loved it too much. It stayed. And I'm pretty sure that it will happen again. And maybe if one of the pieces really kind of touching people and they really want it permanently, it will happen.
Absolutely.
Like you say, I think it's just being confident that it's a powerful journey and that it there's nothing threatening. And I think we're very fearful as architects, as designers, as artists. We're fearful that yes, it's ours, someone's going to copy and so on. And I don't know. I think once you let go of all that, once you let go of the fact that someone might copy you, and once you're a bit more just open and teach and spread and gift and just kind of, to the limit of what's reasonable. I don't want someone to just copy and then just walk away.
You know what it is? It's the difference between... It's the difference between believing that you are your career, like you've just a silly example. I had a intern that I was working with, and a professor of this intern, she's now traveling through Europe for the next few months. And the professor of this intern had said to her, no, you really shouldn't go traveling right now. You should go to work, because right now is the time to work. You can go travel later. And I wanted to go to her school and just beat the crap out of this guy. That is just the worst advice. Because what you're telling her is that her career and her escalator professional pattern is basically everything that defines her. And here's all the time we're telling her, and I'm telling every young artist I deal with, no, that magic follows you around no matter where you go. If tomorrow you end up in a different country and start from scratch, oh well, you'll come up with the next thing. You'll create the next thing, and it's you, and you're the only person who can do that. And even if you try to do the exact same thing that the previous person did, it's still going to be different because you're the one that made it, and it came from your life experiences and your approach.
It's very true. Our personal journey, our personal experience is probably the only thing that the computers, the AIs won't be able to have.
Yeah.
This is what will define the self. I really think this sort of personal journey that I went through, I'm like that person. I was at this university in Paris, and all I did was walk in the street, take picture, go to the dark room and publish. And I don't know why I was doing that. I mean, to me, the main reason, the way I see it, is probably that Paris is just so beautiful that being in a chair to some teacher was nowhere near as satisfying as just walking down the street, going to the Rodin Museum, sitting down and seeing his sculptures, understanding the process of each of those artists. Picasso, all these people that just were in Paris, and you just kind of go to those museums and learn about that. And by seeing the art, it was so much more satisfying than sitting and listening to someone talking about it. I really feel that. And I took a ticket, and there's this beautiful thing in Europe called Eurorail. And it's, you have 3 countries of your choice, and you can roam from one train to the other without having to buy more tickets. You basically can travel anywhere you want within that. And I think that's for people that are young, and it's amazing. And I took a ticket and I just went by myself. Everyone is like, you're crazy, you're traveling by yourself. I was 19, but I had my notebook, I was writing poetry, I was reading all these amazing authors, and I just thought, there's so much to learn, and how am I going to do? And I always had these 5 books in my back, and it's just this learning is I really believe in that self-learning. Like the fact that if you're curious and you just want to go out there, to me, that's so much more rewarding than, like what you said, just sitting down in a class.
Tell me about your first burn.
Right, so that's how we keep on tangents. It was just we had, I mean, I don't even know where to start. We had no shade structures.
Yeah.
We were in tents in the sun. We didn't really plan the water part. But I was on a mission to make this happen and to prove that we could build. Like, I took this very personally, and I just, all these kind of structures were like puzzles, and, we were just very naive, but we had that drive to prove to the world. And plus, not only that, but Burning Man knew we didn't know what we were doing. And they, just to add a layer, they put us on like 6 p.m., like Esplanade, the most kind of prominent place. So, I mean, it was amazing. Like, they really trusted us. And it's just amazing to trust someone who doesn't know what he's doing. It's just, but I know there's this quote that says, it's not about the skills, it's about the attitude. We wanted to make it happen. We had the enthusiasm to make it happen. And that matters so much more. And to be honest, there was another year that I'll talk about where we didn't even finish the structure. Because they know it's a student journey, it's an academic thing. Like, they just let go. It doesn't matter. Oh, you didn't finish it. You tried your best, Right. And we always try our best, and that's what matters. And what comes out of it is beautiful. Not just as a finished thing. It's beautiful that it's that journey. And what's really funny is that year. We were supposed to. So we finished the Shipwreck and Fractal Cult.
Yeah.
And
I want to know though that year. What were some of the things that, kicked you in the gut that you had not planned for? I mean, now that you're out in the environment and you experienced in person.
So we're in the desert and we unpack all our pieces. We laser cut everything. So we think, it's going to fit just like in the computer and so on. First thing we notice, it's missing like a third of the pieces. And we're on Playa and we're hours of Sacramento where the laser cutting place, We're like, oh shit! Like, how are we gonna do that? We're missing all the this is pretty much like impossible to do by hand, right? So we're considering all the options, okay. And then we just, we go to Gerlach, and I don't even know who has a phone. At the time, there was no network in the Playa and so on. And
the good old days.
Yeah, and so I knock at the door of, Art Support. They had this trailer, and that's the only place you can have like the phone line. And I called the laser. I'm like, guys, we're in the desert. Like, we're missing a third of the pieces. What have you done? And then somehow they managed 2 days after. So we had to reshuffle the build sequence somehow. It was all fine, but it was quite stressful because, if it's a puzzle and that relies on those pieces and they're not here, that was the very first I realized not to be reliant on this digital fabrication that I got obsessed with, laser cutting. It doesn't matter. Don't do it. Yeah. I've been saying this.
Are you listening to Romero? Same thing.
Well, maybe now it's less a problem because it's maybe a bit more spread. And also that year was the year the temple, the pyramidal, it was a beautiful temple by Greg Fleischmann. And it was all CNC'd and it had no screws and it was all modular. It was really interesting. Yeah. And when I saw that temple, that's the year of Shipwreck, I thought, wow, like, it's really beyond art. It's actually the future of cities. It's Burning Man is beyond the festival. It's beyond. It's actually something that tells what cities could be like. And as an architect, that really mattered to me, especially as a teacher, because if I'm going to teach Burning Man to my student, it's got to be more than just, a festival. It's got to be a city. It's got to be something we take very seriously.
Yeah.
And so I've learned to look at it not as an event, but as a potential future and things to learn from, whether it's that aspect, what I said, the shade structure, the self-reliance of it all. It's something that teaches you how to use gray water, how to evaporate that, how to deal with power supplies and fuel efficiency, and therefore in that sense it's very it teaches you how to live with your own means and learn how to utilize as much as you can and optimize your energy consumption and so on. So in that sense it's I would say that's the less formal artistic stuff, but in a sense more boring, but so interesting when you teach architecture. All these things on an environmental basis. It's great. It's great that you can experience it somewhere, you know, you're there, and it's part of the principle. You're self-reliant, so it's very driving. It's a driving force for people, you know. You're no longer the consumer. You're no longer the person that waits for something to come to you. You're actually doing it, you know. You're self-expressing it. All these, it's just great. Yeah.
You said there was a year that you didn't finish.
Yes. So that was the first year. That was Shipwreck and Fractal Cult. We came back. We were really just on a high, very happy about this whole thing. I mean, it was really fantastic. And then the second year was when the Hayam Sun Temple won, which was this piece by Josh Haywood, one of our students. A bit more tricky, I would say, because at that time we realized that as teachers, we were here to guide, but you need a leader. You need a leader that takes the final call. And when the student wins, it's their project. But when you are the teacher, you need to have a final call, because, you know, it might be that the project is over budget and you need to do drastic cuts and so on. And so therefore you need a say, you need to act. And with Hayam, it was a bit harder because Josh is very talented and so on, but he didn't take our feedback and he didn't want to kind of take it on board. And so there was a bit of tension, and we're like, this year maybe just it's probably better if we don't go. And we realized that it wouldn't be always easy, this sort of teacher-student thing. And
so you didn't even take the piece out there?
No, he went. We taught him all year, and this was part of his educational thing. And then as soon as he got the honorarium, we helped him develop the project. And I remember all our conversations, you know, on plywood and how you can bend these pieces, and it was a bit heartbreaking, to be honest. Like, we wish we went. You know, it was maybe easier the year before because there were two pieces. Right. So there was more to manage. And to be honest, Toby kind of took Fractal Cult, I took Shipwreck. So we had affinity with both, you know. Toby is more into straight lines, I'm more into curves. It was perfect. Yin and yang. We could both mentor those two students. They were, you know, students that were open to being mentored. It was much different with this one because, you know, of personality clash. I realized that now. So, but fair enough, you know, he went and he did it, and it was beautiful, and so be it. And he did more projects after, and he became his own thing, and that's great. But we were a bit kind of we missed it, you know. But that year I had so many projects because my practice started blossoming, and we had this 3D printing project in Shanghai and so on. So it wasn't the end of the world because I was just really happy to also do other stuff, you know. And then that's one of the year we got to use this Silkworm software that. You know, I didn't mention it, but I worked on an open source software to send geometries to the 3D printers. I did this with a colleague of mine called Adam, and we just put it out there, and people started using it, and I started doing projects with it. And so all these 3D printing pieces you're seeing is done from the software we developed in order to push what 3D printing could do in the same way that we push the laser Silkworm. And so that year we used Silkworm to develop these really interesting cocoons and so on. And so whilst Josh was in Burning Man doing Hayam, I had a chance to push my own agenda in that sense. The next year was interesting. So we come back. Should we continue this Burning Man? We thought students are ungrateful. What are we going to do? And we decided, okay, let's do it. But then maybe we give the student the choice to either do it with us or to not do it with us. We thought, okay, that's perfect. Okay, great. Let's do that. And then we won 3 projects that year. So it's funny because you never can predict who's going to win or not. And that's really fun because it's about like seeing how will Burning Man react to these projects, you know? And that year was The Infinity Tree by Tobias Power, Bismuth Bivouac by Jonathan Lung, and Reflection by Lorna Jackson. 3 projects, 60 people, you know, the beginning of a nightmare. Wow. But a very, very tough year. A very tough year. And why was it tough? Because the Infinity Tree was the most complex structure that I've ever worked on, ever. Like, until now, I don't think I've worked on anything more complex than that. Wow. Bismuth Bivouac was a charm. It was such a peaceful, easy structure to build, like amazing. And Reflection was a mathematical piece that maybe a tad too mathematical, needed some legs, literally. But it was a really interesting process. So Lorna decided to do it on her own, and Jonathan and Tobias decided to do it with us. So we had this kind of weird mixture of student, but it's kind of weird because we were all in the same camp. So we might as well all do everything together. And we ended up 60 in a camp, which probably was a bad idea because it was, again, 60 almost virgins.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Or students, and like less
People
than 20.
complain about taking 1 or 2 virgins.
I know, and they were less than 25 years old, and it was just me and Toby, the kind of the teachers, and almost like daddies, really, because people would knock at our tent crying, and what is this place?
Oh my God, 60 breakdowns.
I know. And it was really tough. Not only just that, but that piece, the infinity tree, was so complex. It's called a reciprocal structure. So it's when every piece in the puzzle influence each other. You move one, everything moves. And not just that, but whilst we were developing the design, we realized that the forces that were on each of the key points of the structure there was more forces on there than, like, I think they said 10 Rolls-Royce, I don't know what they say, but per point. And they're like, you need a steel column. And the whole point of that project was that we were using the wood to form the structure. We didn't want steel columns. And there was and the engineer, we had this WhatsApp group with the format, and they went crazy because the computer went into a loop that was adding forces. And by adding forces, it was creating more forces. And and we just, and I remember my girlfriend, now fiance, was going to leave me. And Tobias was sleeping in the attic. And I was just like, we're never going to build this. And Toby and I see the numbers, and we're like, $2,000 each. And we're going to have to pay for this whole thing. And we're on plan, we just can't finish. And this festival starts, and we have all these art cars coming to us, a giant shark, and I'm seeing that shark, and I'm panicking, and so it was just crazy. And next to us was this bismuth bivouac, just 2x4 timber, just assembling like a charm into that beautiful cube, and they were done and looking at us, laughing and celebrating, and we're just like, oh shit. But I remember, there were a few moments where we're like, should we just cancel that project? But then I'm like, well, but then it's such a failure. I'd rather fail trying than not try, And I think that's really important for a student to know. There's no failure per se. That everything is
there's only outcome.
Yeah, and this outcome was interesting. And when you see the infinity tree, it's an interesting project. It's not. You don't look at it and think, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, what's that? It looked like this kind of weird, Game of Thrones sort of like kind of plant coming out of the desert. I don't think Burning Man noticed we didn't finish. I don't know. They never told me. I don't know.
Let me tell you something. I have had this conversation with countless artists.
Really?
Listen to me, dude. The person listening doesn't know that you didn't get exactly the sound you wanted. The person listening, or the person looking at your painting, doesn't know that you didn't get exactly the color you wanted. You did this thing. You did your best. Exactly. And you tried to put it out there, and the universe decided this is what's supposed to be finished.
Exactly.
Let it go.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let it go.
I'm sure nobody walks by and go, oh no, this connector is obviously not the correct 3D piece.
You're right. Yeah. Yes, that's why it was such an interesting year for me. Now, coming back from there, we were really, really affected by that year, just financially, emotionally. I was just like, whoa. Toby was shaking. We had our first fight ever. Like, it was just, what to do, right? What are we going to teach now? Because we're broke. We're tired. Should we continue this thing? And that's the year I submitted Tangential Dream. Because I just thought, it's my turn. Yeah. I want to express myself. I've got all this experience. I've learned. And I'm going to do it just in parallel to the students. I'm not going to not let them submit, but I want to express something of my own. And I've learned, from this, the infinity tree and bismuth bivouac, the beauty behind using off-the-shelf material versus the digital fabrication, which is an ideal that is not yet ready to some extent.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I'm going to submit this piece that is a sort of baby between this bismuth bivouac and the infinity tree.
Yeah.
Imagine they have sex. What the baby happens between the most complicated, crazy parametric structure and the most simple, off-the-shelf material kind of structure ever. And something that joins straight lines and curves. How do you make curves out of straight lines? Well, that's exactly what a tangent is. The tangent is the slope of a curve. It's a straight vector that happens at any point of a curve. So I'm like, well, perfect. We could do curves from straight lines. And so that was the tangential dreams, and it was a really, really special piece, I think, because it was so personal. And that year only this one got the honorarium. It probably wasn't so great for the students. I admit that, but they still came. A few of them came with us, and Toby told me from the start I'm not going that summer. So I'm like, okay, well, that's sorted. And so I just really enjoyed, and I just wanted it really perfect. So I brought really experienced people with me, and we had the most organized camp ever. And it was every night we would express into a speech how we felt about everything. So instead of this kind of tension, unsaid things, everything was said.
Right.
When I was at the generator, which is that space where we built up before Playa, I made a point to speak to everyone there so that it wouldn't be, again, this sort of tension, unsaid political stuff that happens often at Burning Man. I just wanted to talk, listen, enjoy. Yeah. And that piece was that. And it was magical. And at night, the LEDs would kind of reflect that rainbow of joy, and it was just very, very special. I just really, really enjoyed it.
So you went through the process of designing a thing before you'd actually even been out there. You experienced what it's like to see that you can't rely on an external source to make sure all the pieces are there, and you need to be ready to throw that together. Then you experienced what it's like to take too much out there. And then in the following year, you decided that this is a time to really focus on, oh, that's right, this is supposed to be enjoyable and fun. And you developed more your leadership and build experience. Yeah. And the obvious following logical next step is to go bigger now that you've brought all these different experiences and skill sets together. And that's how we get to the temple.
That's how we get to the temple. Yes. I mean, so that was 2 years ago, Tangential Dream. And last year I thought, okay, let's try. Yeah. Let's try to do something bigger with what we've learned. I say we because it's always the same team. Somehow we're always the similar people that go. And I've submitted something based on Tangential Dream. I didn't want it to look like a temple. I thought every time I go, the temple looks like a temple. Mm. And by that, I mean, it looks like it's taken from a Buddhist temple or it always has a symbology of a religious thing.
Right.
When I went to the temple the first time, it's the first space I ever cried in. I never really cried in any architecture before. Mm-hmm. It does just this time, and I come from.
And you traveled through Europe, going through all the.
Yeah, I traveled through Europe. I went through all, you name it. St. Peter's in Rome. All these, Parthenon. I never cried. I'm surely when you see the Parthenon, you should cry, right? Yeah. I mean, it's quite something. Or even the Pantheon in Rome. Like, these are incredible structures, but they're not alive. The people they're not performing their function. When I went to Burning Man and I went to the
not anymore, at least
not anymore. Yeah. I don't know if people cry. Would I have cried if I saw the Acropolis when it was at the Greek time? Who knows? I don't know. I can only imagine.
Or could it just be like the next skyscraper you walk past?
I don't know. I mean, it's incredible. It's beautiful. It's breathtaking. But I didn't cry. And I don't know the percentage of kind of crying. You can't stay insensitive to it, but it doesn't have
the Parthenon or at Burning Man.
Oh, sorry, the past structures. The structures that were not performing their what they were doing. I mean, but then even St. Peter's is still active, and it's just, to me, I felt anxious in St. Peter. Like when you're in the Vatican, you just feel the power of this organized religion. You just feel it, you know. And I felt anxious because I felt tiny. Yeah. It's huge, and it's just like it's got all these figures of people looking at you, and it's intimidating, and it's not something that helps me connect to humanity at all. On the contrary, I feel a bit threatened by it. Yeah. And I felt very threatened during the whole trip, actually. Yeah. Because I was just a 19 unconfident guy trying to understand my place. And but when I went to
which arguably at the time that was to some extent its intention, to communicate to you that you are being watched.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because the purpose of religion is to unite people, to link them. That's the term religion means linking, you know, in Latin. And it doesn't. I mean, I come from a Jewish father and a Catholic mom, and my mom, you know, I always thought Judaism was warmer in a sense than Catholicism. I would do both. You know, I would do Christmas in church and then go to Kippur in a synagogue. Now, because we're going a bit deep, but I guess let's do it. In Judaism, you know, the temple was destroyed, right? And they made it a point not to rebuild it, and therefore, I think there's a rule that if you have 10 Jewish men, it forms a synagogue. You don't need a structure around it. So it's very people focused, and when and so when I was a kid and I went to these prayer sessions, you know, Kippur or even during the Shabbat where all the family unites, it's a very you light up these candles. It's a very intimate space. It's very intimate, and it's a much more kind of humane notion of uniting people than what I felt when I went to church. You know, church, especially in Paris, they were big stone building, beautiful. I talked about cathedrals. They're really uplifting structures, but you're tiny. Yeah. And the prayers are. Not that I understand Hebrew, but there is a sense of warmth in the kind of in that religion that I didn't feel in on that side of things. So why am I saying all that? Because when I went to Burning Man and I entered that temple, the first temple that I went through, I saw everyone, and I saw pictures of babies, and I realized they were dead. You know, I wasn't seeing a story that I couldn't relate to. I was seeing a baby that died and a mourning father, and I saw all and then I realized that that's one image out of so many, and I looked around and I'm like, oh, and I got completely overwhelmed and I started crying. And that's when I saw everyone else crying. Yeah. And that's when I'm like, wow, like I'm actually feeling what they're feeling. I'm relating to them, and I don't know, maybe they're Muslim, they're Buddhist, they're not even any religion, maybe they're Chinese, or doesn't matter at all. You know, we're all crying together, and we're all feeling that sense that someone or many people passed, or the sense of loss, and we're all feeling it together, and we're all crying together, and I could not have felt this. I mean, I never felt that. Yeah. Never felt that, ever. And that's like, I'm, talking about Burning Man being more than just an event. That moment, I'm like, it's probably the only truly religious building I went through, And so I wouldn't say not religious, actually, maybe the only truly religious building I went. And
well, I would submit, this is just my idea based on what you're describing, because there's spirituality and then there's religion, and the way that I kind of describe it is religion is the bureaucracy that helps people navigate spirituality, because spirituality is a lot harder to figure out. And so I think when you look at evolutions of religions, there are some that are further away from their sort of original spiritual motivations, and then there's others that are closer to it. And I don't know, it's kind of like the difference between an orange that you pluck off of a tree versus fresh squeezed orange juice that you make from that versus Minute Maid that you buy at the store. Right? That's gone through multiple layers of processing and chemicals. Yeah. So, and I, with sorry not sorry for offending any listeners. So I think like if you kind of look at like spirituality, which is what, a search for God, a communication with the collective unconscious, that's something that we are all human beings to some level striving for. I'm sure we have many atheist listeners who would strongly disagree. That's what I kind of feel like there's a general sense that humanity has, that we're kind of like looking for that connection. Judaism feels like it's closer to the original source of where the spiritual practice came from. Whereas Catholicism, you're looking at various iterations of how it evolved into the version after like long after the Council of Nicaea that led to the building of like the Sistine ceiling. At that point, it's sort of like the Minute Maid that you're buying at the store. That has gone through various levels of processing, as opposed to Judaism, like whether you like oranges or not, it's still closer to the orange that you plucked off the tree, sliced open, and made.
Yeah, oranges. I mean that's one way to see it. I do see kind of I guess one would call it the proximity to the fire, I suppose. You do feel close to an original story and a man, who broke the statues of his dad, saying, I don't want a representation anymore. It was really the religion of the book, the knowledge, celebrating knowledge and not having idols and those 10 commandments and so on. Like, I mean, I can't speak about it like an expert, but my dad, he loves telling me that all the time. So I cannot not speak about it.
No, we're describing a feeling. I mean, I'm sure historian listeners would correct everything we're saying. But this is just like the general feeling. But you're right.
It had this feeling of warmth and it's something that I felt, but what I liked about the Burning Man Temple that it didn't have any associated stories to it. It was raw, It was, you see a picture of someone who passed away, and the feeling that you feel seeing it with the comments of the person who's mourning is very direct emotions, and in that sense, there wasn't added layers of symbology or. There wasn't, like you say, Minute Maid, I mean...
it was more direct. But it's
raw,
Yeah. And
it's the fire. It's actually touching the fire.
Yes. Yeah, because Burning Man feels like... one of the phrases I've been sort of like... It's been playing out in my mind is that it's like the airport of consciousness. And so like when I saw your design for Galaxia, like it really... And I made a note here that earlier you were describing that, and I don't remember the exact sentence that you used, but you were describing some of like when we see that so much of these designs and shapes, you start to be able to predict it and you can create it. And the word you used was scary. And you were saying to some people it can be scary, but to you it's beautiful. And I'm feeling both of those things. When I looked at your design for Galaxia, like it scared me. Just a little bit, because I have been sort of sensing this thing about how Burning Man feels like it's the airport of consciousness. And then here's this design, which just, I mean, it's breathtaking, it's beautiful, but it really does feels like it is connecting to the core of where we feel like we as humanity might end and the consciousness continues to connect. And you've sort of found a way to visualize that, like the end of like the event horizon of a wormhole, possibly.
That's a great way to say it. And there's several things I can reply, because, I mean, one, there's a funny story behind this project. You remember how we went through this entire journey and I started saying that, I met those engineers format and so on. Right. Well, the way I met them and the way we started working was for a project for Virgin Galactic. Yeah. Virgin Galactic is a venture from Richard Branson, who was, is obviously my hero and the very first person who I read about entrepreneurship and so on. And somehow, I don't know how it happened, but we were commissioned to do the hotel for the astronaut. And I had only a weekend to do that.
The hotel for the astronaut?
Yeah, so Virgin Galactic is a space tourism business. And they have a spaceport in New Mexico, in a desert in New Mexico. And they wanted a hotel for the astronaut before they went to their space odyssey.
Right.
And
fascinating.
Yes, fascinating. And so that was my brief. And, I'm like, obviously, 28 years old, and just like Richard Branson's my hero. And they're like, you've got a weekend to do it. And so I just, and I was thinking, okay, well, let's try to do something where I don't know. I used to, when I was like really, really young, they were teaching us computer science when I was, in my 13 maybe in Paris. And there was this thing on Mac called Logo, where you have a little turtle and you tell the turtle to go somewhere, right? And I don't know if you've done it, but that's how we used to be taught computer science. And we did loops with that turtle, and the turtle will leave a trail. And when you do a recursive loop, you can tell the turtle to move and turn and move and turn. So it creates these sort of spirograph patterns that are breathtaking. I remember when I was being taught that, I stayed like the whole day until I got kicked out, just drawing this spirograph, like turtle stuff. And I just went and I moved one parameter and the whole thing just changed. And then I was just producing this drawing. I couldn't stop. It's just amazing. Yeah. Somehow, with these new tools that I'm using, Grasshopper, all these kind of coding thing, I'm like, I just went back to that moment and I started spreading vectors in space and making them move and so on. And it just created that sort of galactic movement. And I'm like, that's cool, because then if I then not do it just in 2D, if I just suddenly also make the turtle go in 3D, then you create these roofs that are completely self-generated by that turtle. Obviously, there's no turtles anymore, but still in my brain somehow. Yeah. And then so I started getting these kind of geometries from this recursive loop. And then by doing that, I then brought, let's say, the sun. And I say, well, maybe if we just make it grow with the sun so that the light would enter when it's cold and it would be blocked when it's hot. So you let the turtle also decide according to the sun, and you let the turtle decide all these things. Informing the turtle, it created this roof. So I showed that roof, and just it was great. And then we started doing a first initial study and so on. But then, I don't really hear back, and I see that there was a first test run of space tourism in Virgin Galactic, and it exploded, and it didn't go well, and I'm sure the whole project got cancelled because of that. I don't know exactly. I don't even know if Richard Branson knows that there is this project at all, or if Virgin even saw it. I actually don't know what happened to it. But obviously, in my mind, it was a very deep project for so many reasons that I just explained, right? And so it stayed in the back of my mind. And this entire journey of Burning Man and so on happened since and so on. And I'm like, actually, you know what? This project would be absolutely beautiful in the desert and made of wood. And why, and also it's the galaxy and it's the ultimate symbol that we all can all relate to. And the black hole, what the hell is a black hole? And is that the new God, because we don't know it. And religion always used to celebrate what they didn't know. The sun is the God, it rises and everything is so bright and everything is alive because of it. And then, with our science, we know what the sun is. We actually know it so well right now, but we still don't know what black holes are, and we haven't seen them, and we don't know if they even exist. And all we know is, Einstein doing calculation and Stephen Hawking talking about it, and they're fascinating things. There might even be parallel universe through black holes and then interstellar. So there is I'm like you probably, when I see something about black holes, I just want to read because I don't know what it is. And it's so interesting to not know because curiosity grows. And I thought, well, what a temple if you could celebrate that, if you could celebrate the unknown, if you could kind of swirl around it just like galaxies do, and really, isn't that the most universal symbol? Right. And so that's how I submitted this one this year.
How long did the design process take then?
One afternoon.
Yeah, because you already had done a big chunk of it.
I mean, Maya, who works with me here, she came to work a couple weekends, but it was just, I think that afternoon when, we kind of gave up. We're like, oh, you know what, it's just, should we just do that? I mean, because doing a temple is a big commitment, you know? And I wasn't sure. And then I know the deadline was looming, and I turned to I was like, you know what? What if all these kind of legs of the galaxies became like a truss? What if each of them were structural, which means that we could repeat it? So instead of letting the turtle do it, we'll do it. And we'll do it with all our knowledge of Burning Man. So will we use 2x4 timber? We'll use planar angles. We'll make it into a truss so we don't have columns. We'll build it radially. You know, I just thought of this thing, you know, as a kind of giant teepee, almost, you know, every one of those trusses supporting each other and forming that sort of really simple, repetitive, symmetrical galaxy that would be prefabricated and built, you know, with minimum effort on the playa. That's a really weird way to say it, but it's the aim, right? To enjoy it, really, to try and enjoy it.
Because no matter how mminimal you try to make the effort, it's still going to be a fucking effort.
Tell me about it. I work 9 to 9. Like, it's just mental. And not just that, it's so much. Right. And then this is 150 people and forming a team and trying to find the people who know what's Burning Man. And, you know, and we're not talking been to Burning Man. We're talking people that built temple before. So it's an even smaller circles and trying to understand all the dynamics between the temples and the people involved in there. And it's just so much to learn, but I love it because there's so much to learn. You grow even bigger and more kind of, like you say, confident about being able to deliver large projects. And it's so nice to be able to prove that an architect can build his own structures. And to me, it brings us closer to that age that I was talking about the master builders.
Yeah. As far as, so you turn it takes one afternoon to do it. You fill out the paperwork, you turn it in. Did they have any feedback notes from Burning Man, or is it? Yeah,
so usually when you start hearing back, it's a good sign. You know, if they ask you questions, it's sort of often that they're interested. So they started asking questions, you know, what's the central piece? What is it going to be inside? You know, it's very important. I mean, this time, like, because you remember I mentioned that I submitted a temple and I made it a sort of statement piece last year, and it was just unbuildable. But I just wanted to make a statement that I didn't want it to look like a temple, which in essence, it went to a form that was unusable, very complex, and I don't know. This year, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to read the brief. You know, after all, it is a project. You know, there is a brief. I'm going to read it. And the brief this year was, 1, we had a theme called iRobot. 2, the temple needs alcoves and spaces to reflect. 3, it needs to be accessible. You know, no barriers, but not climbable. And so I read all these different things. I'm like, okay, let's design something on brief. You know, let's be professional a bit. And so the alcoves, you know, because you have these petals, it worked really well because it creates these little spaces, but those spaces slowly then turn to the sky. So if you start putting the images of your kind of dead relatives, like, you can also see that there is a path for them to escape, you know, and there's a movement, there's a dance upwards. And so I thought, well, that's very kind of on brief. And then the access. Well, everything is an entrance in Galaxia. There's no walls. Basically, it's a minimal contact to the ground. You have an access from every side. There's no north, south, west. It's all a radial design. So everything is access. It's completely, radically inclusive. There's no door. There's no central access, you know, where you go in from a door and that's the only door you can come from. And there is no symbology of a previous religion as well. It is what it is. It is itself. It is a symbol that we can all relate to. No one can own a galaxy. You know, no one can make Galaxy into a symbol that disappeared. It is there. We live inside it. We're part of that swirling movement of planets and stars. And so it's very universal.
That's beautiful. You said we're sitting, by the way, we said earlier that we're sitting in your office here. You said David Best. You communicate with him about the project?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. So obviously David Best is who invented this idea of temple at Burning Man, and I thought it's very important I call him and that I say, that I basically discuss with him what it is to build a temple, what I need his wisdom. He's just a figure, that, he's a legendary figure at Burning Man. Yeah. It's very important to talk to him. Just out of sheer respect as well. Just, I just wanted to know that I know this wouldn't happen without him. But the conversation was interesting because the very first thing he says is, why do you want to do this? And I told him that story about crying and so on.
I asked that question to everybody on the show. Why are you doing this to yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Why? But it always starts with the why. Obviously, it's the most important question. And, I told him that. And I'm not sure if he was satisfied. But anyways, and then he's like, Arthur, there was this guy I was watching during the first burn. I was sitting and he came to me and he said that, his... I think his daughter committed suicide, and this is the first moment he could release his grief, and that's the kind of seriousness you have to deal with, and that's why I'm doing this, and because it helps those people to let go of these emotions. I was just like, yes, that's really a kind of, it is a project. It is a building that built up that importance. It is an important place. It's beyond one artist. It's beyond one honorarium project. It is, Burning Man told me it's a municipal building. There is the hospital, there is the central camp, and there's the man, and there's the temple. The temple is part of what a city needs. Yeah. And so
it's beyond your personal art project. It's your service.
It's a service. Yeah. It's a service to a community. It's a necessary building, and it can't be taken lightly. And so,
did David have any design input?
Yeah. So it's funny because he said, all the building he's done, he says, looked like temple. So he confirmed what I said, but it was intentional. He told me they need to look like temple because that's what people can relate to, and they need to relate to a form that says temple. Now, I disagree with that. I think that on the contrary, you need to be closer to the emotion, and you need to express something that is closer to that fire we discussed.
Right.
The feeling, the raw emotion of belonging and being together, and all these petals coming together in a common dance, to me is expressing that. We're telling that story. We're not telling the story that someone else told before. What you talked about, the Minute Maid of religion. We don't need an associated meaning. It is the meaning. It is itself. So to me, that was that. But obviously, we didn't talk about that. I mean, I obviously.
Well, I would submit my opinion here.
Yeah. Okay.
I think both are absolutely true. I think that the temples that he built for their time were exactly what they needed to be, because we were developing in the consciousness of Burning Man what a temple is based on an already more familiar aesthetic, or something that the human mind and the spirit could connect to and say, this is what it was. So there was an intellectual download that I would argue needed to happen first in order to pave the way for your approach and what it is. Our parents and our older siblings build the home so that we have a home to grow up in, and now we can go out further and go see what's beyond that hill.
I mean, I would humbly accept that as a beautiful compliment. I think it's you're right. Burning Man. It's a city that is extremely empirical in the sense that it developed itself. The temple was not planned. In fact, very little was planned. You talked about the death at Burning Man. I mean, I've obviously kind of done a lot of download on the story, and the very first year they went to Black Rock is one where nothing was organized. Obviously, it came from the cacophony, and so therefore it was a real mess, and people, just kind of to their car and just roll on people. There were guns and so on. And
it was anarchy.
And there was, I think, 3 deaths at that time. And they knew they had to do something. Yeah. They couldn't. In fact, I think the government even asked for it.
Yeah.
So they master planned it. They master planned like you would do. You need to plan it. And then there were decisions taken, the radial nature, the fact that you have all this art in the center. It was a city designed around art. They took decisions. Same with the principles, they emerged slowly. Mm-hmm. One after the other. It wasn't like in Judaism where you have a god that says, here is number 1, number 2, number 3. Actually, each rule evolved from this empirical process. So in a sense,
Larry Harvey did not come down from the mountain.
He's that gardener I was mentioning. Yeah. He actually just he probably is the first one to be surprised to what happened to that. Mm-hmm. It's funny, we have Jerry James in the team, who's the first maker of the men, who basically, when you read the story, it was Larry and him, and he was building the men because Larry wasn't a carpenter, and he was. And he's like, Arthur, well, it was just meant to be a barbecue on the beach. and his voice, I'm like, what?
That's great.
No, it was just meant to be. And he said that to me. I was just like, what? What sort of barbecue end up like that?
That's great.
And he's in, and then I'm just amazed that he's in our team, to be honest. And we just kind of talk about it, and he's the first one surprised to what it became.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. He joined again because I think he was part of the 5 first burns and making the men and all that. And then he kind of, I don't know if he came after that, and now he joined that team.
How is the team selected?
Wow. I don't know if it's going to sound very politically correct, but it kind of selects itself. So it started by I really wanted experienced people. So I just said, obviously when the announcement happened, I received lots of email. Mm-hmm. Some emails were just like, I've been in Burning Man since, like at the very beginning and so on. And I'm like, we need people like that, Yeah. And so a lot of the first selected were just people with just tons of experience. And then I would ask other people, do you recommend them? And then yes, and then yes. And then, so it was just sort of recommendation on a community that knows itself and who can perform, who can be in the desert building complex carpentry. It's something you not only have to be a carpenter, you have to be someone, a full human that can be with people in an uncomfortable tent and no showers and still build and still be positive and not be kind of using excuses, and someone who's got a very open mind and someone very egoless, because there's no room for arguments and power struggles, and there's just no room for that. All we have to do is freaking shut up and build, and make it happen. And so I just wanted people like that. It's over. The years of I just know who's gonna build, who's gonna be annoying.
Yeah.
And we just want building people that just know their shit and get shit done, and that's the main selection process.
Yeah.
I mean, saying this, obviously it's still an educational journey. So it would be very presumptuous to say there's no newbie but I'm waiting for my students to win this year. I think tonight or tomorrow they'll announce who the honorarium are, and I think 7 of my students were pre-selected.
Oh wow.
And I just didn't want to impose that temple on any one of them, and see who they choose for their own team. And obviously that will be an easier way to learn than being on the temple, I think. But they're all invited, and I'm really hoping that a lot of the students will join.
Yeah. So what is going on right now in the process? You have like a US build team, you said.
Yes.
There's work being done in Reno?
Yes. So we have a workspace in Reno called the Generator, which is where we've been building projects before. It's, I think, partially owned by Burning Man or something like that. And they've given us a 400 meter square. That's just add a 0, 4,000 square feet. That is just for the temple. And it's the first time a temple is built in Reno. Which is strange because Reno is the city closest to Burning Man. So surely this should happen. But I think a lot of the communities in the Bay Area And so it was just normal to do it in the Bay Area. But now the rents are just so high in the Bay Area that if you, unless Google sponsors us somehow, but there's no sponsorship, so it's confusing. We cannot do it in the Bay Area. I mean, someone out there, if you have a space, maybe, but it might be too late. I also realized that when you
Larry
build...
Page, if you're listening, please.
Well, Sergey, most probably. But if you're building so far, you also have to use fuel and big transports, and so it makes sense to keep it close. I mean, just on an environmental basis, to have a build site close to your delivery, it just makes more sense.
Right.
And so it makes more sense to build in Reno. However, the community is
behind Fly Ranch and stuff.
Yeah, but the community is smaller. So, I'm going to favor people coming from Reno because they will need to prefabricate a lot of the project during the weekends and so on. So, and that's starting very soon, end of March probably. So, yeah, so a lot of selection happens by just location and pure logistics. Which is hard because it's a very emotional thing, the temple, and a lot of people want to be volunteers just because they connect to the structure.
Sure.
But to deliver an ambitious project like this, it's so hard. It's so technically hard that unless, the core group is made from people that have experience with timber, logistics, camp, water, you name it, like leave no trace and so on. Like we just have to build that core team and the strongest core you can think of.
Yeah.
And so then once we have this on track, it's going to be, pure love for people who want to join, and obviously it also depends on the funding because we're far from the goal we should be at. We've got Burning Man they always partially fund projects. This one they gave $100,000. Right. Then a very generous donator gave $25,000. And now we're about at $8,000. So we're roughly a third of where we should be. Yeah. Which is very hard because if we're not making it, we're going to have to take drastic action.
I mean, has a temple ever not completed because it didn't have funding?
No, but most of the time, the artist went in debt. And that's something David told me. The past temple builders told me that, and that's
because there's so much pressure. You can't not let this happen.
You can't let this happen, and it's a bit unfair on the artist in a sense that. But at the same time, I'm the first one who says self-reliance. Take the risk. It's an entrepreneurial journey, not just a commission that one is given, and I'm up for the challenge. I mean, so far. We're doing our best. We have a fundraising team. We have a fundraiser event in San Francisco on the 30th. But people have to see these things as real, It's not just an annoying message when you say, help us. It's not... It's real. It's real. It's debt. It's heavy, I've received messages from artists that were, $30,000, $40,000 in debt just to bring a piece to Playa. I mean... It's hard. And I really wish that the community was more receptive to that. The artists on Playa are bringing not just their time, their energy, but they're getting no fees, and they're doing this out of pure love. And so if people want to enjoy, they need to also know that Burning Man is not just a ticket, and then you go there and you said it yourself. You're doing that podcast. We're all doing something to make it happen. We're all active. So no one just comes and shows up and that's it, and then enjoy in a passive way. No one should be at Burning Man like that. Yeah. And so even if you give $20, to an art piece of your choice, the one that resonates, just think of it as a good music, like you'd pay, for things that you go and see, or just think about it the same way. Just enjoy it and gift, and that will help us.
Yeah. I mean, the no spectators at Burning Man, and it is a testament to how far this silly little barbecue on the beach has come. That it's true. People do expect, even though I sort of had this knowledge, just you describing it is helping download it into my own consciousness in a manner that I wouldn't have been able to explain to somebody prior to having this conversation with you, because there are certain things that we feel like are such standard parts of the experience that we can't even dream of the possibility of them not being there. And what we forget is that, yeah, they're there because somebody took that on their back and made it happen. I wonder, like, even the reason I was asking earlier the question about Temple not being completed, does the possibility exist that if funding isn't there, the design might shift?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. You know, remember that story of the infinity tree? Mm-hmm. If we don't have funding, we remove parts of it. Mm-hmm. We chop it up, we scale it down, it's a very realistic option. I'd rather this than being in debt. I mean, or maybe I'm in debt. I don't know. Depends on the interest rate. When you do these things, it's also because you're indebted yourself. Like I just feel like I've been given so much, like my student journey, this kind of experience and the kind of reward that I'm getting is just all this positive energy from so many people around the world. It's fantastic. It's absolutely like, it's a dream. It's a dream come true. And so, money is one thing, but this is what a currency that is, And so I will see. The truth is I have no idea. Like, I think we'll make it. I think we'll raise whatever we can. And by, say, April, late April, maybe May, we'll take a decision. And hopefully it's a decision of just focusing on the temple, not changing it. But we'll see. I mean, who knows? Projects like this, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen, what the engineer is going to say. He might say, you guys need a column in the center. Mm-hmm. I hope not, because the early studies are showing that the structure behaves well. We optimized it a lot, and there's as little wood as we can. We're trying to remove any metal from it. It's hard, but it's possible, I'm talking to carpenters and so on, and we're doing prototypes. That period of time is when the project blossoms into what it's going to become, and it's a very quiet period, and it's a period of just making sure the design is as great as it can.
Yeah. If you had to point out something about yourself as a human being that is fundamentally different than what would have been true about you as a human being had Burning Man not been in your life, could you point it out? How are you different now as a result of having had these experiences that has motivated you into putting so much on the line, risking so much to do this thing for the community that you feel this grateful and indebted to?
I'm just trying to think of when I first joined the Burning Man, the very first year, and I saw all these people around, and they're obviously completely wild, and they come to you and they want to speak to you, and when you're focused on a job, you're kind of just shutting off, you don't want to, you're like, oh, I gotta finish my thing, like stuff like, it's just, I can't think of all these emotions, I can't handle them, and I didn't enjoy it. The first year I went, the fractal cult, and I did not enjoy Burning Man. I just thought it's just crazy, and it's so much stuff, and then it's rough, and it's also, I find that I thought it was superficial, and people just dressing up, and I didn't like it, I just didn't. And then when I did this, the tangential dream, I with that spirit of just listening and just saying, fuck it. The structure is so kind of real now. It's just so, the design was really developed so that I could just open my mind, because I knew we were sorted. We were not over budget. The process was really sorted out. It wasn't student based, so it allowed me to really push also my own staff and the people that I work with, and trained people. And so I just thought, this year, let's listen. And I did, and I've noticed that when you do that, you're just in another world. Like, you're just, I've just really, really enjoyed listening and having these conversations, like the one we're having right now. And it really changed me, because I was just like, I just realized that sometimes, and I felt this when I was young, you feel like the world is judging you. I know you feel like it's you against the world, right? You feel like you got to express yourself and the world doesn't want you to express yourself and so on. And when you go to Burning Man and you're open to that idea of kind of self-expression and that there's no spectator and you're part of it and you realize that actually the others, if you're open, are going to give you love and are going to express, things that you wouldn't have been able to listen to should you be closed. And this sort of sense of togetherness and kind of just being open to them, not judged, not be judged, just accept them, accept yourself. I think Burning Man really forces you to do that. Yeah. It really forces you to do that because you just, like you say, you look at people, you're like, how's that person together? And then you meet them in the real world and like you say, they're completely together. And I think that because it's so crazy, you actually need a real togetherness in yourself and the others. Yeah. And actually,
you gotta have your shit together in real life in order to survive that.
Oh, yeah. And actually, everyone you'll meet there is incredible. I mean, it's just you're in the midst of incredible people, and and then when you start listening and opening up, and you just connect, and then you're outside in the default world, and you want to do the same. Yeah. And of course, not everyone has blossomed as you blossom in Burning Man, but it's just such a good feeling to be in a place where that's it. You just can connect with everyone. Yeah. And I think that's really what I took back. Then I just started listening and taking time and not let my emotion take the most of me and spending time just trying to sort things, I don't know. I think leadership as well is a massive one. Like, when you're in the desert and you have 20 people and you have to deal with leadership people, there's no escape in front of your computer with your headphones. There's no such thing at Burning Man. Yep. You're going to have to see someone who hasn't showered, who doesn't want to get up his tent. You're going to have to say, get your shit together and let's go to the build site. And that really changed me as well, because there's no escape. You just got to get shit done. And so that leadership sense and human relations and it just changed me.
Yeah. What are, we're just kind of wrapping up here. Just wondering, what are kind of a couple of projects that you're working on out here in the default world that people can keep an eye out for?
Oh, wow. We've developed a new kind of robot, which is called a cable robot. When I realized, at Burning Man, that digital fabrication, laser cutting, 3D printing, all these things were tricky when you do buildings because of what I mentioned, because of the fact that then you rely on these fabricators. I thought it would be nice if you could use a machine that works with traditional materials like timber, bricks, stone. And so this is a project that was kind of part of a commission from Arash, which is again an engineer, a big engineer. And I presented it saying, we're going to merge a spider cam, a spider cam with a 3D printer somehow. We're going to do a crane that works with traditional material, but is the scale of a building.
Wow.
And so we developed that, and it spent a year of research and so on, and probably even tougher than a Burning Man project, but at least we were not in the desert, and developed this robot. And it's now currently in its last day at an exhibition on AI in Arash. And we're going to probably start, selling it as a product soon.
Wow.
And that's really exciting. That's one of them. Obviously we're building a really exciting project. Things are a bit more conventional, like flats and so on. But what's always kind of interesting is that I'm trying to get us as an office to build them. So we want to build our project. And what does that mean is that for every project, there's always this featured piece that we're going to go out there and make, like a staircase, like a reception desk or something like this, where we use our machines, where we go and make it. And that's something also that came from the sort of Burning Man self-reliance attitude.
The lessons you learned.
Yes.
The lesson you learned that you took out into the default world.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
God, wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for the interview. Thank you for all the work that you've done for the community. Thank you for taking on this huge I mean, we say burden, but I mean, it's a
pleasure. I mean,
it's a pleasure and a burden at the same time. We need to come up with a new word for whatever that is.
Between pleasure and
burden that you've taken on.
Blurden. Yeah.
Blurden that you've taken on to bring this temple for all of us to have experience. And wow, what a massive thing that is on shoulders to carry, that there's going to be an uncountable amount of spiritual experiences and powerful emotional experiences that are going to be had in this thing that you're working on. And we know you need money, volunteers, they can go to the website and all the links and stuff are there. And then find it.
Yes.
And wow, thank you again for everything. This has been absolutely an amazing interview.
Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it. You know who released Arthur's last interview, like the last people to talk to him before he recorded with us for Burner Podcast? CNN. That was the last one. I was heading out to the UK. I connected with producer Rebel and was like, hey, who should I interview while I'm out there? And then he hits me back and he's like, I've got it. This is who you're doing while you're in Europe. You are now listening to the sounds of Soul of Noise. This is their Sunrise set recorded at Playground in 2015. Pretty sure it was on Monday's Sunrise. Soul of Noise, also UK-based, London-based, possibly not too far from Arthur's office. Soul of Noise was featured on session A003 of Burner Podcast Presents Alkaline. That is our DJ Mix show. The links to that are over at burnerpodcast.com. You can find Soul of Noise over at soundcloud.com/Soul of Noise. Soul like ghost. Soul, it's like soulful. Soul of Noise. And make sure to visit mamou-mani.com so you can contribute and make sure Arthur doesn't go into debt, so you can have your catharsis moment in the dust and cry about how your dad never accepted your calling as a filmmaker after you saw Bad Boys and decided you want to make movies when you were 13 years old. I'm not projecting, I swear. Please give us a like on Facebook and join the Facebook group and leave us a review on iTunes. It does help get the show more visibility so more of our peeps can be a part of this conversation. All the links are over at burnerpodcast.com. You can connect with me on all of the social medias at Mr. Arash. That's MRARASH. Burner Podcast is produced by Rebel Dharma along with associate producer Tori Massey, and is released on the first and third Wednesdays of the month and is available on all the podcast platforms. All of them. Our opening theme music, America's Horse with No Name Remix, is produced by Joman. Check out his music over at soundcloud.com/DJ Joman. We love the shit out of you, dear listeners. So until next time, love and light and all that other crap. Take it away, Soul of Noise.
Hot nights coming. Keep the car running. And the fingers swallow my pollen. Gold, I swam into your spell. On the ride of God we fell. You were plush and dolly bed. You had me howling cold. I fell into your skin. On the night you led me under your sin. You had me howling. You had me howling.
I knew that if I tried, I would catch you by surprise.
you with the subject just before LSD is to be administered.
They were looking for normal people, and I volunteered.
I see. You feel you're normal?
I hope I'm normal. I think so.
Well, a little while back, you took quite a series of psychological tests, and I can assure you that you're a very stable and well-balanced person as a result of the tests. How do you feel about coming here and drinking this strange material?
A little nervous, perhaps.
Well, I think that's normal. Well, I think it's time for you to have your lysergic acid. Drink this down, and we'll be back after a while and see how you're doing. This is a glass of water, colorless, tasteless. It contains 100 gamma of LSD-25, 1/10 of a milligram, the equivalent of 1/600th of a grain. An ounce of this material will make 150,000 such doses. Some 3 hours later, let us observe the effect.
burnerpodcast.com.